Welcome everyone. This is Lead with Storytelling podcast, and today I have I'm really excited. I don't know if everyone can tell. Really excited to have Eduvie Martin with me. Eduvie, I call you Eduvie. Do people still call you Eduvie?
Oh, this is food that normally from my former times, my former life.
Oh my God. Okay, so let me know. Once again, feel free to call me out or scold me if I need to cut that part out so that nobody ever hears about it ever again.
No, it's fine. It's not a secret. It's all right.
Okay. So here on, I will use the what everyone else probably knows you by. Okay, so I have with me Eduvie Martin. Okay, Eduvie, you're welcome to my show.
Thank you for having me.
Eduvie is a chartered communications professional with almost 2 decades of global experience in multinationals and startups across continents. She studied broadcast journalism at the New York Film Academy and has a master's degree in marketing communications from the IE Business School, Madrid. In 2023, she was named PR Woman of the Month, Best Internal Comms Rising Star, and awarded the highest member grade fellow by the Chartered Institute of Public Relations for her contribution to PR. In 2024, she was awarded Internal Comms Pro by the Pro Awards sponsored by Google. She is the president of the International Association of Business Communicators UK and Ireland, and on the board of her founder-led company, Comic Republic, working with Universal Studios to convert African superheroes to movies. Prolific speaker and podcaster, Eduvie is known for her compelling storytelling, which influences comms professionals to deliver work that adds value. You are very, very welcome to Lead with Storytelling podcast, Eduvie, and we look forward to sharing, hearing your insights into storytelling and public relations. Thanks and welcome, Eduvie.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
And I have a version of introduction sessions with my guests where I ask them to introduce themselves, but I also know a part of your bio that is I didn't read out, which is at a point in time you were, and I know you're still an advocate for arts and culture and arts literacy and whatnot there, but do you still engage in open mic sessions?
Oh my gosh, I think that's something that I've always found myself is in the world of arts. I'm often surrounded by very creative, very talented people, and I did write poems at some point, but I'm too shy to perform them. So I used to host, and I still do host some open mics, even in London as well. But I started hosting them first of all in Nigeria. We would all come together to beat traffic, and we would experience a beautiful evening of song and poetry, and I would host those sessions. And we found out that many of us had relocated to the UK, and we had like a gathering as well just to do the same, and it was quite nice. So yeah, I still find myself in the world of arts, often cheering someone on and encouraging people to express themselves in the form of art is one of the things I love to do.
And I know Mrs. Idakula.
Yes.
Lydia. Lydia, she's in UK now, right? I think.
Yes, she is. Yes, she is.
So she used to spearhead the Tarua sessions that
Correct.
And I owe you some gratitude. I know I expressed it then, and I still express. I at any opportunity I have, I'll always give you flowers. You spurred me on to do my first spoken word, and it was nerve-wracking. I don't think I've never done that ever again. Ever since, I haven't ever done it.
I'm sorry.
It's one of those things that I did, and then someone might as well have whispered into my ears, just keep your day job. Don't ever think of don't ever think of doing spoken word full time.
Oh no, I'm sure you're just being hard on yourself.
Probably worse, but maybe justified too. but
Oh
that's
well.
our story. What's been yours? Transition. I know you trained in the sciences, or were trained academically in the sciences, but you transitioned, I would say, or maybe not say, smoothly into not the arts, but into communications field. What's that journey been like? From that point of transition to the point where you are right now?
No, I think even as a science student back in uni days, as you know, I was often in the art space. I was often hosting events, writing something, organizing something. I've always had a passion for communications. When I was growing up, I think I had so many mentors, and my parents also said to me, you should read mass communication. You'll have a flair for this. Naturally, you find yourself in these spaces. But then where I grew up, it was like the really smart kids were science students, so like doctors or engineers or lawyers. Well, no, not lawyers, but doctors or engineers. And I came from a background of a family of doctors, so I thought to myself, right, because I could do it. I would do sciences, and I'll also be one of the smart kids in the room. And so I did try to become a medical doctor, and when that failed, I did read a science degree at the end of the day, but my passion for science was always there. And I think it was when I was in my third year in uni that I realized that I really wanted to go into the arts. So I did go to the admission office and I asked for transitioning to the arts. For me was gosh, it was something I should have done a while back. I had always had a flair for the arts, and so I tried to transfer from sciences into the arts in my third year in uni, but I was told I would have to start all over. So I decided to finish school. But the moment I dropped my degree, my first degree, I just continued to pursue my master's and multiple certifications to make up for lost times. So I did arm myself with a lot of certification and education on communications. And so when the opportunity came to transition into the comms field, I was equipped with the skills that I needed for the foundation. And so my career actually started out in banking, in the comms department, and then I just continued to grow from then on. So I've had the opportunity to work for multinationals and also to work for startups with my comms skills.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I think one of the reasons why you share a common thread with my guest, or even an ideal guest for my podcast, is that you, at the heart of your drive, is the pursuit for your love, or the love for storytelling. I mean, how have you seen that passion drive your successes, or the milestones that you've seen in, so you could probably just take one or two milestones in your career that you feel that if not for your love of storytelling, that you would not have had the idea or even the drive to achieve what you did.
I think we need to even unpack what storytelling is. I think way back, storytelling always used to get a bad rap.
Yep.
In the sense that people saw storytelling as someone who uses different ways not to get to the point. It was almost like, why do we need storytelling? Is this fluff? What is the relevance of this? And I think sometimes when you refer to storytelling, especially in the business context, it's almost like, what does this mean? We need to get to the crux of what's required. But as we see now, the way employees consume information is completely different, and we need to get to the heart of the matter, and that's what storytelling helps with. So I'm going to use two examples, one from my personal life and one from my career journey. And from my personal life, I relocated to the UK about 7 years ago, and I was navigating what life in the UK was like for a comms professional who had worked across Africa and was just experiencing life in the UK at that time. And for me, navigating that was navigating potential job loss, which I eventually didn't have to go through, but I did understand redundancy scare because I was on redundancy list 3 times and still chose to keep the same job, So I started navigating all of these things, and I found out that I had this insatiable desire to write about my experience, and I needed an outlet for all of these things I was experiencing. And I would get invitations to speak to young graduates, and I would just pour out my experience. And storytelling became I think it became my own way of healing through some of the uncertainties I went through, and LinkedIn became my outlet. So at the moment, I use my LinkedIn platform to talk about my experiences, and I often would use storytelling to narrate an episode in my life or something I've gone through. And what I found out was that I had loads of young comms professionals who had just started their careers also in the UK, who would come to me in private and write to me and say, "Can we have a chat? I'm navigating, I'm going through this, or I just lost my job. I don't know how to navigate all these feelings I'm going through." And I found myself with a purpose, and I thought, right, I'm going to keep storytelling as a weapon of communicating with people who need to hear about these things and who need someone to talk to. And so I just kept at that, using my platform to tell stories about my experiences and to amplify people who were doing great work in the comms field. So that's from a personal standpoint. Then, from a career standpoint, I will refer to my time in banking. I did banking for almost a decade, and one of the things that I really used to grow quite fast was storytelling. We used to have a news channel, we used to have a radio channel, we had vlogs and all sorts, using employees as broadcasters. We would tell stories about different initiatives happening in the bank. And at the time, we had a very low read rate on our emails, on our intranet, but we discovered that anything that had to do with the journey, telling the stories of employees or using the voice of the employee to advocate for a particular initiative used to do quite well. So we just used that same method to communicate our key initiatives through the voice of employees, dramatization, things like that. Those were some of the best moments in my career because we were able to create ads that mirrored external advertisements for employees, using employees as well, which was quite impactful.
That's awesome. I think that was probably the most exciting example that I've heard about the use of storytelling. Because I think, just like you said, storytellers get a bad rap for being fibbers or being evasive, and it's a common attribute that is used for PR specialists, especially when they say yes, trying to spin the story. So it's always very exciting when one hears how genuine or the authentic ways to use storytelling to emphasize or to project the humanity in corporate organizations. Thanks a lot for that example. And my next question would be, how do you perceive, or how do you perceive, or how do you explain the importance of employee engagement in an organization? And just by the way that you've used, through your example, use storytelling to actually to boost that engagement, boosting not just the numbers but also interest. But let's expand a little bit on the importance of employee engagement, and then we can take some other issues associated with it from there.
I'm currently enjoying this particular book. I'm trying to remember the title now. It's by Emma Bridger. It's Employee Engagement. It's an introduction to a practical introduction, employee Engagement, A Practical Introduction by Emma Bridger. And it is a fantastic book where she defines engagement, because I always like to go back to the basics in terms of what does it even mean. And if you have read any of the internal comms articles in the most recent times, most employees at the moment are being asked to be a bit more, I mean, there's a desire for communicators to get employees more engaged. And the question is, what does that even mean? How are you measuring engagement? Is it in the form of they turned up for my town hall, or is it in the form of they are advocates for my brand? How do you define that? And there's so many definitions. I don't think I've read about 10 internal comms books over the last couple of weeks, and each one of them talks about the myriad of definitions on engagement. In order to answer that question, we need to come to an understanding of what engagement means, and it could be different in different contexts, what it means to you as an organization. But I really love how Emma Bridger analyzes the different definitions and comes up with one that I really like. And I think it's my favorite one, where we're referring to how much an employee feels like a part of the organization, so much so that they would show up for it externally and internally as well. And to get an employee to a place where they're comfortable enough to show up for you amongst conversations with friends, and also, make the extra efforts to do more, to show up at the office, comes from a place of trust, comes from a place of a great culture, comes from a mix of different things, a great employee experience. It's just a mixed bag of different things. So the question around employee engagement always has to start from how do we define it? And the definition is specific to different organizations. What does success look like for you? And then you now know how you want to drive that. Employees advocating for the brand, or employees turning up to your events. How do you want to measure what an engaged employee really is, you see? So I think for me, I always start out with that.
Thanks a lot for that. I mean, being very clear about what your vision is, or what does success look like for you, is a good approach to actually define and also measure employee engagement. Thanks a lot for that. What are some key elements that communication specialists should be looking out to attain, or looking out for, in their bid to tell compelling narratives for their organizations?
Would you be talking in general, or is this through the voice of leaders? In what context
That's
this question shaped?
So that's very good one, because for instance, you could have from both views, either from the point of the leaders themselves, or even downwards, not necessarily downwards, but inwards, your colleagues, or people on your vertical. So those two areas, or those two lenses, might be a good. We could make it broad, and then narrow down.
Okay.
And then narrow down for relevance.
So you want to know how colleagues can use storytelling in internal comms? What
should leaders be looking out for? What key elements of storytelling should you be looking out for to strike the authentic, or the authenticity chord in their narratives?
I think it's the pandemic that caused this. I think the pandemic exposed us to a world of cats and dogs popping up on screens, and you can see the dining table of your CEO, and now we're all wanting them to be a bit more authentic or to tell stories. Now we want them to bring their human selves to work. Before the pandemic, bosses were known as bosses in offices, and it was just like now there's just so much demand for bosses to tell their story in a compelling way so they show up authentic. And I've been to so many webinars and had several conversations with people who say, you really don't want me to be my authentic self at work. You want me to bring you want me to bring myself to work, but not my authentic self. You because maybe your authentic self isn't politically correct, isn't, so there's so many layers to this. I think that we've now given leaders added responsibilities to start telling stories so that they can show up as human. But I actually flip this on the script. I do a lot of observing of my leaders, and they're leaders that have natural tendencies to tell stories and some that do not. One thing I always advocate for is not shoehorning a leader into a particular style. I do not believe that the director of finance has to necessarily always be the one talking about numbers. You might have another director who is also au fait with numbers that you can play up in different scenarios as well, or the director of HR should be the one always talking about diversity or people matters. It can be maybe the director of IT who has a background that's or a personality that's really aligned with that can also speak to those matters. So that's where I come from. So the very first step is understanding your leaders, and then the leaders understanding themselves. So now as a leader, in order to tell stories, you need to think about your objective. What is it that you're trying to achieve here? We know that vulnerability is helpful in telling genuine stories, but we also know that a lot of vulnerability can breed uncertainty as well. So it's knowing how to dial things up and down. It's empathizing with whoever you're talking to and putting yourself in your shoes. So empathizing with them and understanding where they are at in that particular moment in time. If you have managed sales before and you're now a director of sales and there's a problem in the sales funnel and you're addressing them, you can play back your experience as a salesperson and empathize with them and then tell your story in a way that you can, motivate them to deliver results, for instance. So that's an example. I don't want all leaders to start to think that, now I have to have a joke up my sleeve about when I was 6 and I have to tell this story that makes people chuckle and see me as human. Or we don't need to hear all of that. we just need stories that are relevant to the particular conversation. And there's this book by Frank Wolf that's also quite nice. He moves away from just telling stories into crafting narratives, and that's quite a compelling book if you haven't read it just yet, that really looks at that. So I am a strong advocate for storytelling as it's relevant to the moment. And as a leader, you need to identify what that moment is, look into your experiences and see what you can pull from that. Add a bit of vulnerability, not too much. And just speak to people like you're speaking human, just speak to people like they're having a conversation with colleagues. It's simple, easy to understand languages that's inclusive as well.
I hear you on that one, and it's really the point about leaders feeling. There are some people who do it well, which is, what I'm talking about is who have jokes to tell and they tell them well, all well and good. But if anybody's listening, if you are a C-suite, please do not feel pressured to tell jokes, and especially those jokes that you can't be relied on to land. It doesn't always work out well. Thanks for bringing that up. I'm going to share this part of this with a few people in my WhatsApp group. Have you seen an internal communications campaign that you've been wowed by? And where I'm going with this is, we want to be able to extract some of the lessons here, in terms of format, channels that are being used or that work best for internal communications, and how organizations can leverage them. So maybe let's start from one that you've seen or used, and then the lessons from that.
Yeah, there's so many examples. One of the things that I do in my spare time is I judge awards. So I have sat on the judging panel of internal comms awards for some of the biggest organizations like the Institute of Internal Comms, for the International Association of Business Communicators, where I lead as president for the UK and Ireland chapter, as well as the Internal Communications and Engagement Awards that happens every year. And this year I'm also on the Sabre Awards as well. And one of the things that we do first of all is we sign NDAs, so I cannot share specific things that stood out, but I can talk about the winners. And one of the winners that really stood out for me was British Airways. British Airways picked up almost all of the awards last year for their compelling campaign on the uniforms of their employees, which was changed. And in that campaign, which you can also see externally, they've got TikTok campaigns. They also had internal campaigns as well. They did such a fantastic job identifying what could have been a simple, hey, here's a new uniform, go for it, into a storytelling campaign using influencers, using a fashion designer, using staff as models to model the outfits. And in moments where things didn't land very well, they also backtracked and they were able to fix it, also using storytelling to debunk myths about the uniforms and what it meant. And I just thought that they didn't have to do any of that. They could have just had, hey, here's the new uniform, pick it up on your way home. And using the storytelling approach, I thought was very compelling. I was also quite impressed by some other entries that also went ahead to win. There are some very good organizations whose products lend themselves to storytelling, like the Unilevers, like Beefer, where they've got brands that they used to tell stories, like the Dove campaign, about loving yourself, and, just going back into the history of things. One thing that I'm fascinated by, and we used to do this back in our days at First Bank, is the use of dramatization. I love it. And dramatization in internal comms is where you get actors or maybe internal comms employees to act different roles. So rather than tell them about the new intranet, you film two colleagues by the elevator talking about how they can't find stuff. And one is like, "Oh, have you checked the new intranet that's out now?" It's like, really? And what that does is people recognize their colleagues and have a laugh, or they see the same environment as the office environment and they have such a great time trying to analyze where was this filmed, and I've seen this being used in different formats for audit campaigns, for cybersecurity campaigns, where you're trying to get people to stop some bad behaviors and adopt some good behaviors. At BAT, we did use it for a cybersecurity campaign where we had people dressed up as superheroes and, tell the story of how to prevent cyber attacks. So internal comms is evolving right now and it's becoming much bigger, and companies that have the budget are able to do dramatization. But I'm all for dramatization this year. I think it really works, and I've been using this since, gosh, I'm almost 20 years in internal comms now, and we started using this at First Bank almost 20 years ago, and I can still see till today that it's a really compelling way to get people to listen up when they see their friends or colleagues in office environments acting out scenarios that they've thought about in their heads but never really voiced out, in a way to promote a particular objective.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that sounds really super exciting. Question though, this speaks to top-down approaches and mindsets. In what ways can organizations encourage their employees to share their own stories and basically foster a storytelling culture in the organizations?
I think it's simple, by amplifying them. In all the organizations I've worked for, I've never come across an organization that struggles to get stories from employees. Employees always want to share their stories. That's been my experience. However, what you do with your stories then determines how that behavior is influenced, right? So for instance, if you're an organization that stifles people that share stories, you just would never see stories again. If you're one that encourages people that share stories by amplifying them on global channels or recognizing them in some shape or platform, they will continue to tell their stories. So, first of all, you need to have clear guidance on what a good story is and what kind of stories you want, and make this visible in all of the platforms that you use for communicating internally. Once you've done that, and it's very well known that stories are encouraged, you start to see the stories trickle in. And then now, how you handle the stories trickling in will lead to more stories coming out, you see. So, we've had scenarios where we've showcased different employees that have gone on to do amazing things that then leads to more employees in the organization saying, oh, I saw this story on the internet. Can I also share mine? So, yeah, make sure everybody knows that they can tell good stories and it will be featured when it's good, following this ABCD clear guideline, and then celebrate those that share their stories in the way that you want them to.
Okay, so we have an organization that wants to tell good stories, wants employees to tell their own stories, and yet we have storytelling professionals or enthusiasts or the communications specialists who are also paid to report on results, right? Do you have any ideas of ways that, whether quantitative or qualitative, either or both, that we can measure effectiveness of storytelling in internal comms?
But first of all, storytelling can't just be in isolation. It needs to be tied to something. The way we do it in businesses I've worked for is you tell a nice, compelling story that's still driving a business objective. I can't be talking about this person's life in general and then still linking it up to a business objective. So it needs to be tied to a business objective. I mean, the very easiest one is to look at your outputs, right? How did the story perform versus all the other stories you've had for the month, for the year on your intranet? The next thing is to look at your outcomes. How has this influenced the behaviors or the behaviors that you're trying to drive at the end of the day? So those are some clear metrics that you can use to measure. But what's super important is to understand that storytelling needs to be rooted in clear objectives, and I'm looking for a good example of that. There was someone who went in one of the companies I've worked for. There was someone who was able to do like a tough challenge that required exercise and required a lot of time in the wild, and they took some of our products, and because of that they were able to win what they were going for. So the story was about their journey towards that particular experience, which is fascinating to read about because they won world records and all of that. But then at the heart of it was the product that helps to drive their success at the end of the day. So your story needs to be hooked to something. It can't just be in isolation. And then when you are communicating the impact of your story, it's aligned with group objectives, which then gives you gives you more of an opportunity to tell more stories in that manner going forward.
I completely agree. What are some pitfalls that communicators, and specialists need to avoid in their bid to tell compelling stories?
I think it's just waffling on. It needs to be concise. We need to be, I think we have a duty of care. I've heard this said in so many different podcasts about our duty of care, and I really allude to that as well. As comms professionals, we have a duty of care to protect our employees from a lot of noise, and we have to be the guardrails to ensure that the information siphing out to them is actually valuable. And so in an attempt to tell stories, we shouldn't now be creating all this unnecessary long form content. Stories need to be concise, they need to be relevant in order for them to be appreciated. So I think we need to not take that long form content over relevance of this particular story. It also needs to be timely as well. So that's something that we need to be looking at as comms professionals. We also need to ensure that we are only tied to key objectives as much as is possible. Because if you have a lot of stories that are not tied to your group objectives, they're going to be looked at as waffle, but you want to make sure that they are relevant, and so you can justify why this storytelling approach is necessary at this point in time. So those are the key things I will highlight.
That's great. One, I hear you, because now these days, or right at the time of this recording, Facebook has thrown their hands up and said basically that everyone now has their users now have the agency, or rather the responsibility of verifying the information that they receive, and I believe that gives communicators an added. They've been doing this, but now they have an added weight in terms of responsibility of ensuring that the information that they put out is verified, but also the information that they share is also verified, to avoid misinformation. So I really hear you on the point of reducing the noise coming in, and maybe even the ones that they are pushing out through their stories.
You raised a very valid point there. I've had scenarios where a stakeholder presents a scenario like it is, and without fact checking, you publish a story and you recognize that wasn't quite the case. So this is really important to highlight verifying your source and just checking that things are as they say they are, so that you don't lose the trust of your people. And one of the last Edelman trust barometers I looked at was the organization was really trusted in terms of the source of information. I'll be keen to see how that evolves in 25 in terms of how people perceive their trust sources, in line with the recent updates that we've been hearing from the tech companies and also from the political sphere. Interesting times for us as communicators, for sure. A lot of work to be done.
Yep. A lot of work for us this year. And hopefully things take a turn for the better, and perhaps the big tech actually stand up, or take that responsibility to also ensure that we are protected as users of their platforms. Thanks a lot for that, Eduvie.
I also think that we have a big role to play as individuals in how we verify. I don't know if you remember back in the days, you get all these forwarded messages and someone says, forward it to 10 people or your life comes to an end. Or if you don't forward this to 5 people, something happens to people's families. So I think that educational piece is so important, to educate our family and our friends. I know sometimes when I get things from friends, I always go back, I'm like, this isn't true, check your source. So we also have a responsibility to educate those around us to say, hey, check your source. Or sometimes I'm often saying to my mom, who forwarded this to you? Don't listen to this person again, this information is false. So it's also playing our part in ensuring that those around us are informed, where we have more information than they do.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's one of the ways where the skills that we learn as communicators actually it's not just a professional duty or sense of duty, but care of duty, but also a personal one, and one that we can also pass on to people, educate people on. I agree with you on
absolutely.
Eduvie, you've been marvelous. This has been good, but I'm not letting you go just yet. I did promise that we have a rapid fire session, and don't worry, it's not no curves here, just it's all for fun. Are you ready?
What? I'm losing you. I think I'm losing you. I can't hear you anymore.
I said we have a rapid fire now.
I'm just kidding. I heard everything you said.
Okay. I'll happily repeat myself, trust me.
If you lose me, it could be the connection.
Oh boy. You know, there's a version of this recording that could go where I repeat myself 5 times, 10 times, and I just have to do the editing thing just for your sake. And people will think that it's a glitch. I say no. The guest knows why I'm doing it, just so that she knows. This is feedback.
Let's
You're
go.
making me
I'm ready. Let's do this. I'm ready. Ask
okay.
me.
All right. All right. Okay. Question 1. What's your
Mhm.
go-to comfort food?
Crisps. Everybody knows that.
If you could have dinner with any historical figure, who would it be?
Michelle Obama.
Why?
I mean, I think that she has been in positions of power where she, as an individual, is a very powerful person and very talented person. And then she's also been in a position of leading and living with someone that's so powerful. So I'm married to the CEO of a company, a visionary, and also one with a wealth of knowledge and expertise, and one who's leading global organizations as well. So I navigate with her how she managed life as the wife to a very powerful person, and also navigate how she managed life as an individual of her own accord, who is also just as powerful and was still able to support her partner in that. So I feel like we have some similarities. Yeah, I didn't say my husband is Barack, but he's quite impressive. And sometimes when I've read all of her books, I see some intersections which I'm like, if I could just have a chat from my lips to the universe, Michelle. Call me
Yes.
up if you can hear us.
I was going to say that. Yes, I was going to say that. That sounds like something that should happen and will happen soon. Beach or
Actually, as soon
mountains?
as it happens, I'm gonna be like, we said it on this podcast first.
And I'll take that clip
Beach or
and I'll
mountain?
say yes, yes. I'll promote that
Yes.
clip in response to your actual release of that conversation.
Yeah. Yes, please. Beach or mountains? Mountains, definitely. Who doesn't want an adventure?
Woohoo! Sign me up. Favorite book that impacted your life?
Oh gosh. Ah, fiction or business?
Let's take one fiction and one business. Let's go crazy.
Okay. Business has to be Impact Players by Liz Wiseman. It was recommended to me by a boss, my current boss actually, and it's one of my favorite business books ever. And fictional has to be Chimamanda's Half of a Yellow Sun. And the way that book ended was, I mean, that was my favorite book of all times. Fictional. And I've also really enjoyed, it's a struggle for me because I've really enjoyed Damilare Kuku. She's just come on my radar and she's written nearly all men in Lagos are mad. And it's quite funny. It's a very hilarious read. So I love her writing style and short, sweet. Well, I mean, it's a lovely book. So, but if I had to choose one, it would be Chimamanda's Half of a Yellow Sun.
Awesome. And I'm gonna get. I have 5 books that you've referenced in this video so far, and I'm gonna take. I'll take. Please send me the full names. I can we can have a conversation, but
Okay.
I'd like to put that in the notes for people to actually check out.
Okay. Oh, I don't remember all of them, but if you,
I will let you know.
I don't remember all of them, but I can.
I have them
Okay.
listed.
Okay.
Last one.
Okay.
What's a skill you've always wanted to learn, but you haven't had the chance to yet?
A skill I have always wanted to learn, but I haven't had a chance to yet. Swimming. Is that weird? Like, I have had a chance to learn how to swim, but I still don't know how to swim. I can swim. I mean, I won't die if you put me in the water. I can swim, but like if you put me in the ocean, I'll most likely die. But I can swim somewhat, but I just don't know how. But okay, fine. Let's answer that question properly. So a skill that I would like to learn that I haven't learned just yet. Gosh, it's a tough one. It's a tough one because I think the reason why I can't answer that question clearly is because I'm a go-getter. If I wanted to learn it, I would just do it, right? So the fact that I can't think about it is it's not top of mind right now for me. But
That's a
I love to acquire skills. I love to acquire skills. So I'm always curious and always learning something new, invest in developing myself. So I struggle to find something that I just didn't want and go for it right away. I think that's why. And the swimming one is like I'm doing it, I just can't. So anybody who has tips on how to kick, that's what I'm struggling with. I will be grateful.
Oh my God. You just invited people to drop comments about swimming on
Yes, please teach me.
on the
I'm
channel
serious
for
because
storytelling.
I did try as a child. I learned how to swim, still can't kick. As an adult, like quite recently, I did sign up to swimming classes, and the teacher did say she actually has no idea how to teach me to kick. So help me, anyone.
Okay, we'll put out the word. Okay, that was a fantastic close. Eduvie, once again, thank you so much for your generosity, your time. I'm here on this side and I'm rooting for you. And we see all the work and all the valuable contributions that you're making to the community of our community of practice. And continue spreading the good word, the gospel about storytelling wherever you are, on whichever side of the world you might be. Thank you so much for everything, for being
Well,
here.
and thank you for having me. I've had such a great time having this conversation with you, and all the best with all your future guests. Thank you.
Thanks so much.